Welcome back. I have the pleasure of introducing a very interesting and relevant panel session on how the IT channel keep things running. We all know that the IT channel has shown its resilience and adaptability during the COVID pandemic, keeping society moving and the world's critical infrastructure running. The channel was a real lifeline to their customers during this time. Let's find out more as I pass over to Josh Budd, CRN Editor, and Carsten Winther, Vice President Sales EMEA for Vertiv, and Julian Thompson, Senior Director Advanced Solutions for Ingram, and Jithin Asakan, Acting Head of Projects at Smartworld. Over to you, Josh.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion with Vertiv. This time we're going to be talking about how the IT channel can keep it running. I'm joined by Julian Thompson, Senior Director of Advanced Solutions and Sales at Ingram Micro. I'm joined by Jithin Asakan from Smartworld, he's Head of Projects. And I'm joined by Carsten Withers, who's VP of Sales EMEA at Vertiv. Yeah, hi guys, nice to meet you all.
Hi Josh.
Hello.
Hello.
So obviously the last 18 months have been incredibly unprecedented and different in terms of how customers have approached IT. There's been a well-documented shift to cloud and many changes that customers have made to their IT infrastructure. What have been your experiences after in the last 18 months, and how have you kept customers? How have you helped them keep their IT running over that time?
Would you like me to take first stab at that?
Yeah, go on. That'd be great.
So initially, with the announcement that came towards the back end of March 2020, there was a clamour to work from home. So immediately, the devices demand exponentially went through the roof. The need for unified comms went through the roof. And suddenly the pressure on all networks just exploded. So within Ingram, our first demand was about making sure that all those elements could be shipped, not only to our partners, but also to our own salespeople, our own business managers, our own credit controllers, to make sure that we were fit and up and running. It's interesting to note that the market has grown every single month since the start of the pandemic, with the exception of September just exited. Now, the other challenge at the same time, as everyone would have seen, is we've had huge constraint problems. So massive ramp up in demand, massive constraint challenges. But as that pandemic continued, or as the pandemic continued, and indeed still continues, we noticed a big shift in our resellers. So the furlough scheme was interesting. We had a huge chunk of partners take it immediately. Now, what I found interesting about that is if you look at the timings, there were certain partners that had massive quarter ends and big year ends approaching. And for some of the partners to furlough straight away told me quite a bit about the relationships that they had, because this goes from transactional relationship to project-based relationship. And I don't want to jump ahead for some of your questions, but one thing that we then became very aware of, there was going to be partners that we didn't know too well, that were going to be very connected with their partners, that would need a very different type of support from us very, very quickly. So without me dominating the first 15 minutes of the discussion, I can go into that in more detail in time, but hopefully that answers your initial stab at the question.
That's really interesting. What did that tell you, the fact that so many partners were taking advantage of the furlough scheme? What did that sort of suggest to you?
Well, it suggested to me that there was a lot of transactional relationships. And transactional relationships by definition are short-term. And as you start to trade through challenging circumstances, if you can have a depth of relationship, you'll be much better placed to succeed and come through the other side.
That's interesting. Was that the case with you guys as well? Did you sort of see a lot more sort of transactional business going on during those initial months and during the last maybe 18 months?
Yeah, I think in all fairness, I'll second what Julian mentioned. I think it was kind of like into phases. The first phase was all about everybody trying to, land on their feet. I think this came as a big change to all of us. And there was, as Julian mentioned, first of all, there was the element around getting our own infrastructure up and running. to meet this particular demand so that we could actually serve the customers. And with Vertiv, that happened very fast as well. And then secondly, there was the element of actually ensuring, as we're in the data center world, obviously ensuring that all sites were up and running, that uptime was actually kept. There was some tremendous complexities around purely getting access to sites and helping our customers repairing infrastructure when needed, which actually caused for a lot of safety focus, needless to say. And I would say, I think everyone here actually is very focused on safety, but I think that became really kind of a little bit like the exam of all exams onto how safety can actually play a vital role. And then there were obviously the very shift, as Julian was alluding to as well, with people having to work in an enterprise, well, whatever that means in terms of connectivity, and all the way, all of a sudden have to work from home, which obviously had a lot of pressure on the core and the cloud, combining where before we were actually maintaining or building enterprises. And I think the very results are in the very data of development of these particular types of the market. I found it also tremendously interesting to see that it was not necessarily something that would happen in one sector or another sector. It pretty much happened everywhere, which obviously causes tremendous pressure. We've now seen, even after we open in various geographies, in different tempos, but actually also in various sectors in different tempos, there's tremendous need for material planning. And I think my colleagues here will scream with me when we say that this is probably the biggest challenge we face now, actually coming smaller, or let me say, more and more out of the actual pandemic. But there has been a need for actually turning to the partners you trust and have had a long-term relationship with. I sense that from, as a manufacturer at least, that partners tend to trust more into, turn more into the partners they trust, rather than having this, as Julian called it, a transactional relationship. And obviously, as a newer channel player, that is something that we have been obviously been alluding into, having basically to build on that trust, probably in a greater degree that one would normally do if one had been in the channel play for 30, 40, 50 years. But I think we've all had a chance to sharpen our swords on what a trustful relationship looks like, actually.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because during the pandemic, everyone leaned on their current partnerships, on their existing partnerships, and went to the people that they trust. So you saw a lot of resellers, a lot of distributors go to their vendors and but the ones that they knew they could rely on during this time, and that became quite a key aspect of it, didn't it?
Absolutely.
So I think for us, Smartworld is primarily a system integrator for the aviation industry. So we struggle a lot with getting equipment because there was such a high demand, and none of the equipment was coming on time because of the semiconductor issue and so on and so forth. So that was a huge challenge that we faced over the last 18 months. And I remember even because primarily we go on ground to implement the project, so we needed to think outside the box. How are we going to configure devices remotely? Is the airport going to allow us to use VPN and connect remotely? These were all the kind of challenges that we faced. And as Justin said, COVID protocols was one of the biggest challenges. You need to go to the airport, you need to take a PCR test every day. This is before the vaccine, yeah. So the vaccine came much later. So there was a period of 6 months when people are just taking PCRs every alternate day, going to the airport and getting the work done and so on. Yeah, it was challenging, but I think we've come out of it quite well. It's really tested the system. I think we came out.
So was that one of the main challenges, the fact that the sort of health and safety measures was very time consuming and getting on site was very difficult, and actually providing that service for your customers became a lot more difficult, as a result of the new guidelines and the new restrictions in place?
Absolutely.
I think in the beginning that was very much around safety. Obviously that safety is maintained for all of us. I think I can say for all of us. But it was obviously an immediate action, right? People were dying. So we needed to save people's life here. And one way of doing that was obviously just double the standards of every element of safety. I think as well for for us in Vertiv, as Jason was mentioning, there also obviously we were stress testing the ability to remote manage the sites. Right. The monitoring capabilities obviously became a big factor, and I think that has remained. By the way, I mean a lot of new habits have come from what we have been doing in the last 18 months. But definitely keeping the sites up and running. I would also say that, and probably again my colleagues will agree, I also saw a much higher desire to plan ahead of the future, because no one of us actually really knew how long this would last, how severe this would be. Had we seen the worst of it? Would it be even worse? Because we were in a new, no one had ever been there before, I think, in our lifetime. So we saw at least a tremendous increased desire to plan for future sites, future renovations, refurbishments, new builds, and actually, also even smaller enterprises working to try and stay, can I say, not dependent on having their own little infrastructure, but actually being able to switch to the cloud, for instance, with a moment's notice in the future as well. I think that has also been an element, which I think has even increased the need for planning for material. That's a big challenge for all of us, I would say.
That's really interesting. Because obviously, the industry played an instrumental role in keeping the economy going. Obviously we had hospitals. In the UK, we had sort of the Nightingale Hospital that was being, provided for by resellers. They were providing all the equipment for that, and we had a lot of resellers who are helping as well to provide laptops to schools and all this business. So do you think the industry has really sort of proven its worth as a result of the pandemic? And do you think now customers are now looking to partners, as an even more vital asset in their business?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all work in an industry that was deemed as critical for society during the pandemic. And I know, at least for us, while we saw, corporate regulations preventing businesses from working in factories and so on, we were to some degree actually extended for that, obviously, because of the need for having that particular infrastructure up and running. And I think it has actually made it more efficient, in all fairness, as an industry. It's quite interesting, Julian, I think, hit it quite well when he said that we actually saw some of the biggest peaks in demand and business during the pandemic for a number of companies. Not necessarily saying that this is something that we obviously wanted to happen for that reason, but the need for critical infrastructure that is up and running all the time, I think has just been proven to be vital. And I think it will not disappear from now on, right? I mean, we have changed the way we work now, haven't we?
Yeah.
I think there was a marked contrast between devices and UC sales in that first 6, indeed 8, 9 months, and there's still very much a pent-up demand, because as the backlogs have increased, there's still a huge demand. I would say enterprise solutions initially were much slower, but I would say that probably remained the case for about 6 or 7 months, so possibly into the back end of 2020. Then we've seen a huge increase in the enterprise projects, and even though there's massive backlog issues now, I mean, our backlog is unrecognizable compared to what it normally would be, and therefore there'll be perceived that projects are being delayed, which they are, but we're not then seeing the next project will be therefore further delayed. We're seeing that partners and the end user partners are coming via our partners and saying, right, we're now going to place project number 6 and then project number 7, because we can't wait for project number 5 to be deployed, because we will then, once it's deployed, we could be a year down the line. And we could still very much be in a place, in the first quarter of next year, wondering if those projects will be satisfied during 2022. So we haven't seen a drop in the continuation of placing of project orders, even if they're reliant on the previous project being delivered, because they know they need to get into the queues to make sure that the kit and the solution's available.
Well, what's driving that behaviour? Is it the supply chain issues that the industry's facing and the unpredictability of that's driving customers to place multiple orders one after the other?
Well, I think it's very much project. It is a mix. So absolutely, with the tremendously long lead time, there are partners that are looking to secure stock for the future. But if I make it just the enterprise part of things, these companies don't just spin on a dime and tomorrow I'm going to spin up X, Y, and Z infrastructure project. They're all planned. Now, some of them were delayed for the first 6 or 7 months. So there's that pent up demand. But what they're doing is they know they've got these projects to place over the coming 2-3 years for rollout. So let's get them on now. It's not a case of let's wait for project 1 to be delivered and then we'll place project 2. They know they need these projects in this order. And to the comments that my colleagues here have made on the call, that planning appears to be better. The need for being ready for future challenges that are coming appears to be very much in place with certain partners. So it's not a scattergun approach in placing orders. It's that we need these projects to do these upgrades, and this is how we want it to work.
That's really interesting. And what's the sort of nature of a lot of projects now, and how do they differ to what kind of projects were happening, even before the pandemic in 2019? You get this idea that people are sort of building back better and they're building back for a new way of working. Has the nature of projects changed as a result of the pandemic?
That's a good question. I like catchphrases like building back better and all these various things that people come out and say. Yeah, undoubtedly, the market has moved. The requirement on our people has changed. Yeah. So we need to ensure we build an infrastructure that those people can flourish in. So yes, to that end, there will be a slight difference in the projects that are being rolled out. Some of it, though, will also be about people who have taken stock of what they really do need and saying, right, let's make sure this does happen. And we've also got to bear in mind that budgets are still issued every year and budgets still need to be spent. And we see that all the time under different guises. So build back better, maybe, but build back right for what's required, then definitely.
That's really interesting. What have you sort of seen, Jiffin, from your perspective? Have you seen a sort of shift or change in behaviour from your customers and the kind of projects they're doing, and what kind of things are they coming to you for now?
So definitely there's been a change in the requirements as well. So the whole methodology of implementation is now changed. It's all tried to do remote stuff. Even the training that we do for new technologies is done remotely. And that was actually practiced during the COVID time. So it was successful. So that also in turn reduced costs for the end users, so for the customers. And they're looking at that from that perspective, saying, guys, let's do it this way so that we achieve have shorter durations as well as you cut down on your operational costs. During this last 18 months, we've seen there is a change of customers who want to host their data in the cloud now rather than on-premise. I mean, there is a lot of project which is being initiated now at the moment, especially in this region, because primarily in this region, everybody wants to host their data locally because of security concerns. But now the trend is changing. People are understanding VPNs and cybersecurity laws and firewalls and so on and so forth. They're getting more comfortable to migrate their data to the cloud-based service where they don't have to spend for the infrastructure, build a whole data center. And it's more of a pay-as-you-use kind of methodology, isn't it? So I might only need a certain part of infrastructure. I don't need to invest in a whole data center and think about the cooling and the energy costs, or I can cut down on those. So there has been a shift in that. In fact, we're seeing a high demand for shared data centers and clouds.
That's really interesting. Have you guys seen that as well? Have you guys seen a sort of shift towards those kind of models?
I think, as you mentioned, some of the elements that we normally do when we're deploying more complex projects, obviously, is, for instance, factory acceptance testing, which was always happening live. Obviously, the current pandemic prevented us from doing that with our customers. So we invented tons of augmented and virtual reality tools in order to have those testing happening remotely. And interestingly enough, a number of our customers have actually insisted that we continue on that because it suffices. So, and I think that's a good thing, right? It also minimizes the CO2 footprint as well. So in terms of traveling and I think not necessarily linked to pandemic, but as been kind of mentioning here as well, there is an increasing focus on sustainability, right? It happily enough challenges us as manufacturers in order to drive more and new innovative solutions for the products and solutions. I don't think it happened because of pandemic. I think it would have happened anyway, simply because we're such we're an industry that just uses a lot of energy. So, but definitely that is something that has happened now, which was probably not the case the same pace a couple of years ago. I don't think it's entirely due to the pandemic. I think it's due to political agendas around the world and the everlasting increasing need for data management in the world. So yeah, no, absolutely.
That's really interesting. We've heard that on CRN, and more and more resellers are saying that their customers are now requiring sustainable projects, and it's a major criteria for public sector, frameworks, as well as stuff in the private sector. A lot of people are asking for that, and I guess that goes all the way up the supply chain, doesn't it? If a customer's asking for it, then a reseller needs to provide that, and then the distributors also need to do that. So there's quite a lot of has this sort of knock-on effect for the rest of the supply chain.
It has. I mean, I don't think that's linked to pandemic at all. I think it's the way the world develops, frankly speaking. I mean, and it's not just the public customers, may I just say. It's I think it goes across the entire board, where I was going to say actually almost in every sector, we're seeing an increased need for having sustainable projects, whether that links into the various components, whether it links into the rollout of deployment of the projects, into the various management of the sites. I'm sure even in the devices manufacturing, we're seeing it, and I think it's the only way forward. Needless to say, I mean, the amount of power we are consuming here, the world would not survive if we don't come up with new ways of supplying renewable energies and refurbishing sites, and using new technology to cool and bring stuff back into the grid, so we can be actually warming up houses rather than just sitting there waiting for something to go wrong. I mean, it's absolutely a must, and at Vertiv we see it everywhere. It's not just within the big hyperscalers or big governmental sectors. We see it everywhere.
If I could just add to that, I think very simply, I think from a manufacturing standpoint, we need to move away from the just-in-time fulfillment, because just-in-time fulfillment means air travel. If we can put that onto the seas, I know it's a 12-week lead time, but there's instantly an improvement. So I think understanding the demand and then planning better, taking out the need for the express delivery, getting more of it via sea freight will have a huge benefit. I would love to have a grid card of 30 different things that can help make things more sustainable, reduce the energy. I'd love to see that, and I'd love to see across each of those what the impact is. I was talking to a colleague of mine, but in the UK there's a great advert for a particular beer, which I won't mention because I don't want to give them some free advertising, but within the beer, this seal appears at a pier. And actually, they then talk about the amount of seagrass, I think it's called, that they're planting at the bottom of an ocean that apparently absorbs more carbon than the Amazon rainforest.
Wow.
And when you see that, you think, okay, wow, should we be doubling down on planting more of this at the bottom of our oceans because it absorbs so much carbon? I think if we, whether it ever got like this, you could rank, and this is unfortunately how my brain thinks, what's the top 20 biggest impactors we could do? And then let's start focusing on them and doing them. Because one thing that I do notice that there's a lot of good intention everywhere. We've seen partners coming to us as a distributor asking, what are you doing? How can you help us? what's the manufacturers doing. And it appears that everyone has good intentions, but there probably needs to be, I think, better coordination. I think there needs to be an idea about what the things that will have the biggest impact, and then collectively, work those through to help. So just on the back of what Carsten was saying there, it's certainly there's a lot to be done, a lot that can be done, and that supply chain absolutely critical, because it is eye-watering how much power and energy that's used, because we've become a just-in-time system over the last 15-20 years. You no longer pack products to the gunnels in a warehouse, but maybe there needs to be a slight change to that.
What's your take, Jithan? Have you had your customers request more sort of sustainable projects, and is that high on the agenda of your customers too?
Absolutely. I think reusability of existing infrastructure is something that they're really focusing on. They're trying to see what we can do with their existing infrastructure before we propose a new solution, try to audit them and give them reports saying, okay guys, this is some aspect of it you can use, and some of them you can't. So that is something that they're really looking into, as well as energy management. Energy management optimization is becoming one of the major topics now. Even when we are doing data center designs, one of the first things that we do is they ask us regarding the energy optimization. Because previously it was not something, especially in this region, that we were looking at much. We got what we requested. So there was no energy saving concept, but now that's changing, and there's a lot of drive from consultants pushing to have this energy saving a part of this whole package.
And that's something that really plays into your skill sets, doesn't it? You're able to provide those services, and that's another value add that you can provide to your customers.
Absolutely. So we'll be proposing the smart cabinets these days. So instead of having cooling the entire room, we just have the cabinet which comes with the UPS and all of the components built in with the camera for monitoring and an AC as well. So you're just spending energy just for that cabinet, or how many of a cabinet, instead of having a huge room with 10-15 racks. You only need about 3-4 of them. It fits the purpose.
Customers come to you and sort of ask about whether you can meet certain sustainability criteria. What sort of things are they looking for? What sort of things really matter to them in terms of reducing their carbon footprint and stuff, and how you can help?
You're asking me?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
All right. So first of all, I just want to say we should not forget that some of the biggest, players in this particular field of industry already have specific carbon neutral objectives. They have been clearly sharing those with the rest of us, which kind of sets a scene, in all fairness. And at Vertiv, we have spent and are spending tons of money in innovation in order to actually be able to follow that, not necessarily because they say so, but because it's the right thing to do, needless to say. That goes all the way from manufacturing footprint, as Julian was saying, right? We've been very focused on what's the travel time and distance for the various solutions actually to go between manufacturing side and installation side. And by the way, dare I say that this is also where good channel partnerships come in handy. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for that as well, by the way, because it's something we all benefit from. But there are also the various elements, as Jithan was mentioning, in terms of technology, right? There's elements around making sure we don't use too much water in the cooling technologies, making sure that we're using renewable energy in the power solutions, and making sure that we're not using too much power in those solutions as well. As Jithan was alluding to as well, there are elements around how we are manufacturing our solutions. So which material are they based on? There's elements around analyzing all the way from one to the other end in terms of the carbon elimination. Needless to say, the whole circular economy, ensuring that within waste, we are trying to minimize it all the way from supplier until the end customer. Technology enhancements obviously drives a lot of this, frankly speaking, and that goes within at least how Vertiv is contributing, but it actually also goes into the various supplies management, installation capabilities, as I was talking about before, the testing capabilities. It goes into the monitoring capabilities that Jiten is talking to, which technologies are used, how do we cool it down, how do we power it, where does it actually sit within the data center. We would like to consider ourselves being very ESG savvy, and of course we are very focused on this. And I think one of the questions you asked earlier is that something we've seen been requested more. I think we can go as far as to say that it's been demanded more. Right. I think you will find it's kind of like preconditions to be able to deliver to a lot of our customers nowadays. Right? It's the way it works now, and it will only increase from here. I mean, if we're looking at some of the data center lands that is actually being acquired now, is not just to host the buildings, it's actually also to host elements of the power generation that needs to happen in a renewable manner, right? Whether it's a windmill, solar, whatever it may come from. The very locations they actually sit in, I think is very much linked to a sustainable thought process.
That's really interesting. Just sort of maybe move on to the last question of today's roundtable. How should a channel partner invest in themselves, would you say, over the next year or so in order to best serve their customers? What sort of things should they be looking into? What sort of skills should they be investing in order to provide maximum value to their customers? If anyone wants to answer that one first of all.
Well, I can give my take, and I think my esteemed gentleman will then pitch in. But there is a classic story of always making sure that we understand where each of us actually fits into the value chain. As I was just mentioning, obviously distribution helps a manufacturing company being closer to the customer in terms of delivery. We cannot build a factory next to every site, right? That's impossible. We can minimize it, and with the great distribution capabilities, configuration capabilities we are seeing from our colleagues within Ingram, a lot of value add services coming from Jiten. Obviously, there are elements where we can play a role, a defined and agreed role within that entire value chain, going all the way to the end customer. I have to say though that unlike a couple of years ago, there is probably also a need for continuous education. And I'm speaking to ourselves as well, because we're seeing new technologies, we're seeing new demands coming from customers, not just in terms of sustainability, but actually also of monitoring services. Let's not forget that this industry is growing like there's no tomorrow, right? The internet, the bandwidth of the internet is growing more than ever before. The need to go from the core onto the edge is growing more. We've been talking about the edge for many years, frankly speaking. I think now we can actually say that we are not starting to see it happening. And I mean, research shows that this is something that will grow with more than double over the next 3 years. So there's a very strong need where we each can play a significant role in, depending on our, dare I say, specialization within that route to customer and added value to customer, where, all us three sitting here plays a big role, each in one of these. And I think good channel partnership is probably understanding and aligning where those partnerships come in handy. So none of us wants to compete against each other, because the customer needs all of us at the end of the day. And at least we're spending a lot of time in Vertiv trying to articulate how each and one of us plays a role within that partnership. And once everyone agrees to that role, we cannot do it alone as a manufacturer. Ingram cannot do it alone, and Smart Solutions cannot do it alone. We need a lot of different actors in that journey to keep the customer at the center of everything we do. And I think that particular alignment and agreeing that we all need to run a business upon that particular alignment absolutely is key. So collaboration obviously is probably a key success criteria for every channel partner.
So do you guys agree with that, Julian and Jiten?
I think educating yourself and keeping yourself updated is extremely important. So we as Smartworld are focusing a lot on digital transformation. We're getting our team completely, up to speed on what are the new technologies. So whenever a customer comes to us, we try to educate them on what are the latest technologies and how you can use them to reduce your costs. We're also doing a lot of automation capabilities as using AI and machine learning as well. So compared to the previous system that we've done before, we're just using that raw data to give, especially the aviation sector, more raw data so that they can utilize it for future things.
That's really, and but from you, Julian, have you seen that sort of thing as well? How do you sort of seeing your partners sort of investing over the next year or so?
So, as my colleagues have said, it's, and I sort of said this right at the top, our partners need to decide, are they going to be transactional? Are they going to just respond to demand? If they do, that's great, and many livings have been made from that. But I believe it does put partners in a more challenging position when we have massive events like we've had. Now, you could argue we had one 100 years ago. We've had one, we're still in one now. Will things return to normal in many ways? Quite possibly. But understanding the partners, as my colleague says, and understanding your part in what you can do to bring them, now I'm going to use that horrible word that people use, value. Now, value is a great word, but it only means something if the person you're providing the value to finds it valuable. So I prefer to call it capability. We have a lot of capabilities. If our partners see them as value, fantastic. And then we can build on that. But I think there will be undoubtedly a whole heap of transactional business that's done. It's how the world has worked, and how it continues to work. Then there will be those partners that will invest more in trying to build capabilities that enable them to give their end user partners the forward-looking support that's going to be needed. Now, not everyone can do that. Not everyone can be a value-added reseller in the truest sense of the word. And there is a whole heap of transactional stuff that needs to be done. So I'm not being snobby about it. It's just people understanding very clearly what is their part to play and what can they do and how do they plan for that future.
That's fantastic, guys. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I think we have to end it there, but it's been really great hearing all your thoughts and insights. Been a really, really interesting discussion on my part, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.